Just a brief introduction on Sheikh Taha Abdul-Basser. Sheikh Taha Abdul-Basser is a researcher and teacher of Islamic ethics and law. He was lead contributor to the Harvard Islamic Finance Informations Program database software on Islamic financial ethics and jurisprudence. He independent study course instructor at Harvard Business School, senior tutorial advisor at Harvard University's Department of Near Eastern Language and Civilization, and Harvard Islamic Society chaplain. He received his bachelor's in comparative study of religion from Harvard College and a master's in Arabic and Islamic studies from the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations at Harvard University. He has studied the traditional Islamic disciplines with teachers from Sudan, Yemen, Tanzania, and Bahrain. He has received traditional licenses in Islamic ethics and law, prophetic traditions, hadith, and other disciplines from several notable scholars, including Sheikh Nizam Yaqubi. So inshallah, Sheikh Taha Abdul-Basser.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافئ مزيده والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد المبعوث رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. It's a blessing from Allah, glorified and exalted is He, to be able to gather together in one of the houses of Allah Jalla Jalaluh, in order to recite the book of Allah, to be reminded of the sunnah of Al-Mustafa, the chosen one, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, to worship Allah by standing and bowing and prostrating before Him, in keeping with the shar', with the path that Allah, glorified and exalted is He, has laid out for humankind and jinnkind. Among the best of deeds, as the Olama have mentioned in times past, is to learn that science, those disciplines by which one is able to discharge one's responsibilities vis-a-vis one's Lord. That is, the things that one needs to know in order to have a successful meeting with Allah on the day from which there's no escaping. And for this reason, you find that many of the fuqaha, in the beginnings of their books, will mention the importance of fiqh, of understanding whether or not an action is acceptable to Allah or not acceptable to Allah. And when it comes to fiqh, just like any other ilm, it's important, nay, required to know from whom are you learning, right? Muhammad ibn Sirin, Atabi al-Jalil, and others mention, so be careful from whom you take your religion. So be careful from whom you take your religion. This necessitates knowing that with which one can separate the wheat from the chaff, right? Who are trustworthy, reliable individuals who have achieved a rank recognized by their peers, such that one can feel comfortable taking from them that which must be taken. It's a very simple and very straightforward principle. When something's dear to us, and it needs to be maintained and safeguarded, and there are experts available whom people claim can help us take care of this dear thing, in order to take care of it, but we make some effort in order to find out whether or not they're reliable, well-trained, competent, can do what they're supposed to do. Health, our life, its maintenance is very important to us. So when it comes to ourselves or our dear ones or anyone, for example, we don't say, go to anyone who claims they can take care of you. The person needs to be a doctor. They need to be trained in a certain way, recognized by peers who are senior to them, tested along the way, recognized. When it's a tough condition, then we say go to a specialist. When a specialist gives an initial response and the consequences of the initial diagnosis might be tough, it might require a surgery, a procedure that can be hard or entail the loss of a limb or the loss of a faculty, then we say get a second opinion. I.e., go to a specialist of even higher standing among his or her peers. When we find people in contemporary society who are practicing medicine without proper license, they're punished by loss of freedom, right? By a confiscation of wealth. So how should be the matter, of course, with the deen of Allah Azza wa Jal? That every single person has the tread in order to rectify his relationship with Allah, just as every single person maintains a body that needs to be kept healthy. But when it comes to asking questions pertaining to knotty issues as to how one should best do this, there are also specialists when it comes to the deen of Allah Azza wa Jal. And these specialists also have ranks. The individuals whom you have been studying and hearing from by people better than myself yesterday and today, Sheikh Maulana Mujib al-Rahman, Hafidhullah Ta'ala, and Sheikh, our friend Sheikh Hamza Muqbil, Hafidhullah Ta'ala, and Sheikh Tariq Amir, Hafidhullah Ta'ala, Tariq Amir, Hafidhullah Ta'ala, have given you an insight into some of these individuals, alhamdulillah. Particularly those who are the eponyms, the founders of the madhahib fiqhiyah, right? And they've given you an insight, an understanding also of why it's important to know who these people are. Why does one care? Why does it still matter 1,200 years after they live? Their schools, their ethical legal schools, why do we care about them? Why don't we just freestyle? We have the Quran, alhamdulillah, Allah has preserved it for us. We have the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the muhaddithun, and they exercise themselves to give us an idea as to which ones are acceptable and rigorously authenticated and which not. Why make things difficult? Why not just go at it, right? Because even though the basic principles of health are fairly well known to literate people, no one says when it comes to a matter of fixing a problem in health or answering a question with regard to a matter that requires expertise, go at it. You have a body, everyone has a body. You know the general principles of health. Don't do things that hurt you. Eat well. Just get it done, right? This radical egalitarianism, anti-clericalism, ecumenism, when it comes to matters of deen, has a shaky foundation when it comes to our intellectual tradition. Yes, every single one of us will have to stand in front of Allah. No, we will not fall into the trap of some of the communities who were given the book and 10 prophets before us of saying, I listened to whatever a person told me he was supposed to be a cleric, and that's my excuse in front of Allah, because we know that will not be accepted. So we bounce between that extreme, but another extreme. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Al-ulama'u warathatul anbiya. Right? The ulama are the inheritors of the anbiya. Right? And what is it that they inherit? فَإِنَّ الْأَنْبِيَاءَ, indeed the anbiya don't pass on as a legacy, right? الذهب الفضة, gold and silver. But rather, their irth, their legacy is what? Ilm. It's knowledge. Knowledge of what? Knowledge of the book and the sunnah, and at-tamassuk bihi, how one holds firm to them, ظاهرا وباطنا, inwardly and outwardly. Okay? The last of the imams that we're going to study on this blessed weekend is Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal occupies a special situation and a special ranking vis-a-vis the other imma. One, the issue that I just mentioned. Temporally, chronologically, he's the last of them. This is important, as we shall see, and has an effect on his madhab, a praiseworthy effect. Okay? Two, as might be expected, he has a student-teacher relationship with all of the three imma mentioned before. All of them, directly or indirectly. As for his relationship to Imam Shafi'i, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, then Sheikh Tariq has already, I'm sure, alluded to this. Right? He is the student of Imam Shafi'i, Muhammad ibn Idris, radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And Imam Shafi'i is a student of whom? Imam Malik. Right? So Imam Malik is his grand sheikh, right? And Imam Shafi'i is his sheikh, right? Referring to the familiar relationship which is created by ilm. The famous allusion to which is attributed to Imam Shafi'i. Right? Imam Shafi'i said, al-ilmu, knowledge is a binding familiar relationship akin to the relationship between people who share the same mother. Right? As a piece of a larger ibadah of him. Right? But what is his relationship to Imam Abu Hanifa? Twofold. Right? One, among the earliest majalis that he sat in, as we shall see, is the majlis of Qadi Abu Yusuf. Who's Qadi Abu Yusuf? He is one of the two Sahiban, right? One of the two noted companions of Imam Abu Hanifa, radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Right? Imam Abu Hanifa had passed away, right? But Imam Abu Yusuf was teaching, and one of the first majalis, one of the first sessions of ilm in which he stood is that of Imam Abu Yusuf when he was very young, right? 16 years or younger, okay? He left that circle quite early, after only a couple of sessions, for reasons that we'll mention, right? And went to study the rihlat, which are characteristic of the muhaddithun. Okay? So this is his relationship. The second relationship is more indirect, and we shall see it. It's that Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, although as we shall see, he traveled throughout the entire Muslim world, is a man of Baghdad. He's a man in Baghdad, clearly, right? And the fiqh of Imam Abu Hanifa, as you heard Saturday, and as you heard through an allusion during the talk about Imam Malik, and as you heard during the talk by Sheikh Tariq, the fiqh of each one of these eponyms, each one of these a'imma, mustaqillun, mujtahidun, one of the ways you can think about it is that it is a coalescing and a refinement and a rectification of regional fiqh, a fiqh associated with a region, right? So one of the ways you can think about the fiqh of Imam Malik, as Sheikh Hamza made very clear, is that it is the fiqh of the people, of the fuqaha, of Medina, reified and coalesced and refined in the fiqh of Imam Malik, right? And one of the ways you can think about the fiqh of Imam al-Shafi'i, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, is that it is the fiqh of the people of the Hijaz, right, of Imam Malik, and the people of Mecca, but the Hijaz, right, in encounter, in debate, in development, through mujadala and discussion with the fiqh of the people of Iraq, of Basra and Kufa, right, as you know from his interaction with Imam Muhammad al-Shaybani, all right, presented as a madhab, and then redone again when the environment changed when he moved to Misr, to Egypt. Okay? The fiqh of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal is a reflection on all of the aqwal and all of the transmitted opinions of all of the areas of the Muslim world, compared, sourced, linked to ahadith, akhbar, and athar from the time of the Sahaba and the Tabi'een and the A'imma after them up to the time of Imam Malik. All right? So that's one way of thinking about the madhab of Ahmad ibn Hanbal. That's why among his characteristics is kathratul aqwal, right? That it has a lot of formal positions attributed by the Imam on multiple issues. Right? Right? That's why, contrary to what some of the Orientalists, you guys know what Orientalist is? It's a word that's used to refer to a European non-Muslim specialist in Islamic intellectual history, beginning primarily in the 18th century, but rising in the 19th century, and according to the Western academic tradition, coming up to maybe the middle of the 20th century, at which point there was supposed to be an understanding slowly that maybe some of the previous understandings of European scholars were self-serving and served imperialism, and they're supposed to have been reformed, and now such people are called Islamicists or specialists in Islamic studies, what have you. But a reflection on the intellectual tradition in which we're trained would justify calling them Neo-Orientalists, many of them, right? Because of some of the same confounding, and from the point of view of the Islamic intellectual tradition, problematic principles and traditions remain, okay, right? The Orientalists, one of the things that they indicated, some of them indicated, was that the madhab of Imam Ahmad is a madhab which is characterized by conservative, reactionary, highly restrictive, dry, stale mindsets. Whereas, for those who are knowledgeable of fiqh, one of the things the mutafaqih in the madhab of Imam Ahmad learns quickly is that it is not incorrect to say that the madhab of Imam Ahmad may be the madhab of the four surviving madhab of the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, which is characterized by the most wus'a, right? The most expansiveness and, for want of a better word, liberalness on many, if not most issues. Right? This is not what you've heard, so this may be surprising. Right? But there's a reason why, for example, when Sheikh Nuh Hamim Color, right, the well-known contemporary alim, author of The Reliance of the Traveler, a encyclopedic translation of a well-known book of Shafi'i fiqh, right? When he's dealing with the issue, which is a technical issue in the madhahib, of what is the hukm of a muqtadi praying behind an imam who belongs to a madhab other than his own madhab, which has been dealt with by the muftis of the madhahib, and alhamdulillah, all the madhahib have a good answer with regard to it. There's a reason why in his translation of a relied upon, authoritative Shafi'i text, why he finds it beneficial to refer to and allude to the position of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal with regard to that issue, right? Because although there are a multiplicity of opinions in, for example, the madhab of Imam Abu Hanifa and the madhab of Imam Shafi'i, and multiple opinions that are given in order to make it clear that there should be no ta'assub, no blameworthy factionalism with regard to one madhab or another madhab, that the madhahib are paths, routes towards implementing the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The clear opinion, mufta bihi, the madhab, the rajih, in the madhab of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal is, if the madhab of the imam, if the salah of the imam is sahih, valid, as per his own madhab, then salah behind him is unproblematic. That's the clear position of the madhab. Okay? That's wusa, right? That's expansiveness, part of which comes from the fact, again, that Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal is chronologically the last of the imams. So by necessity, his knowledge of and awareness of the aqwal of the Imam Mujtahidun Mustaqillun, the previous mujtahids who preceded him, is vast in a way that the others didn't need to be. Right? Because one of the requirements for ijtihad, as the ulama of Usuluddin would clarify explicitly, is knowledge of the aqwal of the fuqaha that preceded one. That's one of the shurut of ijtihad, right? One of the conditions for a person to be a faqih who's reached a level where he can authoritatively look directly at the nusus, the source text, from the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, and arrive at a hukm, shar'i, with regard to this action or that action, right? Without having to do taqleed of some other faqih, is that he be aware of the aqwal of fuqaha before him. Why? So that a statement that he comes to, he has an idea of the playing field. Who said what, who hasn't said what, what's contemporarily feasible, because it's likely, not necessary, but likely, that if previous mujtahids, previous fuqaha, haven't gone outside of a certain delimited boundary, that there's a reason for that. Right? Okay. Who is he? Okay. So Imam Ahmad is Ahmad ibn Hanbal ibn Hanbal, ibn Hilal ibn Asad, ibn Idris ibn Abdullah ibn Hayyan, right? To the end of the nasab that's mentioned for him. And it may have been mentioned before, the ulama have a multiplicity of opinion when it comes to long ansab, long genealogies that are attributed to people, right? Between trusting them in detail and holding, and it is apparently the asah, the sounder opinion, that after a certain period of time, that one doesn't have to hold that each one of the individuals mentioned, is necessarily the son of the one who precedes, right? Meaning that as things go back, it's possible, if not likely, that things become fuzzier, right? Okay. But the son of the Imam, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Salih, reports in the riwayah that he was composing a book about his father during his father's lifetime, and he mentioned his nasab, mentioned his genealogy, who his fathers were, going back and back to the Arab tribes, what have you. And his father saw him with the book. He said, "Ma tasna', what are you doing with it?" And he said, I plan to, capture, who you are, et cetera, so what have you. And he said, "Read to me from it." And he read to him, beginning with it and saying, he is Ahmad ibn Muhammad ibn Hanbal, ibn Hilal ibn Asad ibn Idris, ibn Abdullah ibn Hayyan, ibn Abdullah ibn Anas ibn Auf, ibn Qasim ibn Mazin, ibn Shayban, ibn Dhahal, ibn Tha'alaba, ibn Aqaba, ibn Sa'ab ibn Ali, ibn Bakr, ibn Wa'il, ibn Qasim ibn Hind, ibn Afsa, ibn Da'immi, ibn Judayla, ibn Asr, ibn Rabi', ibn Nizar, ibn Ma'ad, ibn Adnan, ibn Udud, ibn al-Humaysa', ibn Hamal, ila akhirihi, and that the Imam didn't reject it. He didn't object to it, right? Which means that at least he considered it to be sound, because as we shall see, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, as was the case with the other imma, was rigorous when it came to transmitted opinions, naqal, transmission. He did not play games. And he did not suffer fools. Right? He wasn't a hard, bitter man. SubhanAllah. The imma of Sunnah imitate the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, zahiran wa batinan, outwardly and inwardly, right? And our Nabi is Nabiur Rahmah, right? That's one of his anaween, that's one of his titles, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, right? So all of the imma have akhbar and athar, which indicate that they were reflecting this prophetic light. They were humble, restrained, soft-hearted, forgiving, forbearing individuals, right? But when it came to matters of deen and matters of naql, and when it came to innovation, blameworthy innovation in the deen, al-bid'ah, al-madhmuma, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, as is the case with all the imma, did not suffer fools. Because he understood that when it comes to deen, you're not talking about my ego or your ego, or whether I like you or I don't like you, or whether or not, our arwah or junudun mujannada or not, what have you. We're talking about a weighty responsibility. What is the weighty responsibility of the ulama? What is the weighty responsibility of every single qarn, every single generation of this ummah? This is something that seems basic, but we need to remind ourselves. The basic responsibility vis-a-vis the Quran and the Sunnah is to pass the deen on as you received it. That's a generational responsibility on every single generation of the Ummah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You might say, yeah, of course, that's straightforward, right? No, but this is a serious thing. Nothing destroyed the Ummah, the communities associated with previous prophets who received book and received the paradigmatic example, the Sunnah, of their Anbiya, except at some time or multiple times they thought, you know what, we're facing challenges, we're living in a different scenario, the environment of the time in which we live has changed. Our fathers, they were good people. They gave fatwa or they passed down things based upon the environment in which they lived. But now things have changed. We need to be up to date. We need to contemporize. So, we need to not only do ijtihad with regard to seeing how the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ can be operationalized so that it's best operationalized in the time you live, but we need to make changes in what we pass on to the people after us. And that is the doorway to halak, to destruction. Because what happens in the next generation, or 3 generations, or 4 generations, or 5 generations, or 10 generations afterwards, is that there's confusion about the book and the sunnah of the Nabi or Anbiya, and the opinions, commentary of Olama or Juhala or non-Olama in intervening Qur'an. So for those of you who may have some knowledge of religious studies generally, and may have some knowledge of the genealogy of the scriptures of various world traditions, you may know that particularly with regard to the other so-called Abrahamic faiths of Judaism, Christianity, there is discussion even among the scholars of the tradition as to how one differentiates what would be for us sharh, commentary of ulama of this time and that time, and what may have been attributed to Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, or Isa bin Maryam alayhi salatu wasalam. There cannot be this failure. The basic responsibility is to pass on the deen as it was passed on the Prophet and his companions to the people after them, by the people after them. This deen, no. Every ummah vis-a-vis the deen of Allah, their responsibility is to follow, not to innovate. Now, I am American, right? I am a son of the times, right? I'm trained in intellectual centers of the time, and I understand that when it comes to intellectual activity, what is praiseworthy in our time is innovation, right? Okay? I have a background in software architecture and the like. There are disciplines where innovation is great, and the Muslims themselves recognize that. Al-ibtida', innovation, when it comes to whole swaths of human intellectual activity, is crucial and important, and the Sahaba understood this, right? But when it comes to deen, innovation is not praiseworthy. It's not mamduh. It's madmoom. It's blameworthy. And this is the understanding of the A'imma of this deen from the time of the Sahaba to the time in which we live right now. But you may say, ijtihad, the action of the mufti, new situations. Isn't this innovation? No, it's not innovation. There's innovation with regard to the methodology by which the deen is practiced. There's innovation with regard to the modalities by which the Quran is written. For example, right, the inclusion of diacritics, of dots, right, of tafannun, right, of artistry when it comes to khat, writing, of the use of various book-making methodologies, moving from papyrus, for example, to paper, karid, which came from China. These are all innovations with regard to disciplines that pertain to intellectual transmission. But when it comes to the ulum of deen, the Quran in the Sunnah, in their essence, innovation is blameworthy. Blameworthy, right? This is not a conservative position, right? It's not a position of, it's the position of the ulama of Islam. Okay? If a person has a problem with it, they don't have a problem with me, because I'm not an alim. So I'm not even someone that's suitable for you to have a problem with, right? My opinion doesn't matter. If someone has a problem with that, they have a problem with what the Prophet ﷺ intended clearly. This is mansus. I'm not talking about the niyyah of the Messenger ﷺ, frankly, right? Balligh anni walau ayah, right? Convey from me, even if it's one ayah, right? Right? رب سامع أفقه, right? Perhaps some of those hearing, whom would receive them, will have more insight than the person who's conveying, right? So there may be people who come in generations after you who understand my ahadith and their insight, particularly for the times in which they live, even better than you do. But that's impossible if you don't convey the ahadith exactly as you received it. Okay? So Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, he was serious. Okay? He's known as al-Shaybani because his forefathers include Shayban, which is one of the sub-tribes of the well-known Arab tribes. Okay? He's known as Thumma al-Maruzi. Why? Because his father and mother were of the tribe, his father was of the tribe of Shayban in Maru, right? Which is in Transoxiana, Khorasan, which is where? North of Iran, in contemporary Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, right? These, well, parts of Afghanistan, right? These are areas that were not peripheral to the intellectual tradition of the deen. They are at the very core of it, right? And a person from Maru, al-Maruzi. Thumma al-Baghdadi. Why? Because although he was conceived in Maru, his father passed away before he was born, right? And he was given birth to in Baghdad. He was given birth to Baghdad in what year? 164, right? 164 of the Common Era, right? Which is approximately what, 740? No, 740 of the Common Era, 164 of the Hijri era, right? So what was happening in the world this time, particularly in Baghdad? So from Sheikh Hamza, you heard that Imam Malik lived in the time of the Banu Umayyah, right? You know that there was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who passed to Ar-Rafiq al-A'la, right, to the higher companionship, and that afterward, that were the Khulafa al-Rashidun, right? Imam Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, Umar ibn al-Khattab, Uthman ibn Affan, and Ali ibn Abi Talib, karram Allahu wajha, right? And then after that, it passed to Muawiyah, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, a Sahabi, right? And that after that, it became something akin to kingship, in that it was passed down to descendants of Banu Umayyah, a subgroup of the Quraysh, right? So what had happened was that, as you heard, many people from the Olama, from many districts of the Ummah, had serious concerns with and justified complaints with the hukm, the rule of Banu Umayyah, the Umayyads, right? This is not a position only attributed to people other than the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. This was something that the ulama of Hijaz and elsewhere had an issue with, right? Because of mistakes that were made, right? May Allah Azza wa Jal forgive all of the believers who've passed away before us, right? Right? But mistakes that were made, clear, okay? In the year 150, 14 years or so before Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal was born, there was a political upheaval. The Banu Umayyah were overthrown, the family was slaughtered almost to the last man by a revolution which came from the east, which at least superficially was in support of people who were descendants of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or from his inner clan, Banu Hashim, the Hashemites. And the flag being raised was the flag of justice and mahabba, love of the near descendants of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, right? And the people who came to power in this claimed descent from, and the descent is actually established from Abbas, right? Radiallahu ta'ala anhu, the uncle of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? Right? And their descendants, Banu Abbas, known as the Orientalists as the Abbasids, right? Right? The first of their leaders was known as As-Saffah, the bloodletter, really by way of indicating the brutality with which the Banu Umayyah were done away with. Right? The Banu Umayyah may have committed mistakes, but none of the people of righteousness looked kindly on the way they were done away with. It was fitna. Right? And there was fighting then between them, and eventually the hukum settled. Right? So by the time the Imam is born, the Banu Abbas, the Abbasiyun, right? The new Khilafah under the descendants of the Abbas are established in Baghdad. Okay? And their hukum has just settled, but there's still concern. Particularly, there's concern of what nature? They are descendants of Abbas, but there are people who can claim even closer affiliation to and descendants from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? And the concern, the people, one of the ibtila, one of the difficulties of being put in a position of political power that very few are saved from, is that one becomes manically paranoid, constantly concerned that everyone is conspiring to try to wrest political power from one's hand, to the point where people can't sleep. Right? Right? This is where, espionage and intelligence groups and trying to ascertain whether or not there's going to be a coup years and years before the coup, and counter-espionage and all other types of mischief and things that are prohibited in the ummah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, spying on people, violating their privacy, trying to spread rancor between them, different factions and groups, so that they don't join together and overthrow one. This is where this comes, right? This is why the imma of this deen, although they recognize the importance of having the ulama give nasiha, loyal advice to the Ahlul Hukm, the Salatin, they themselves, as a matter of adab, wanted to keep away from the majalis and even the near proximity of political authority. Not because they held to the contemporary secular principle that deen is one thing and political establishment is another thing. No. It's well known that they're interwoven and can never be separated, as per the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Right? But they understood that the majalis of the ulama, except for the super rare amongst them, are majalis of dunya, of concern for keeping control, of concern with dhulm, taking people's things, of killing, of torturing, and the like. Right? And they said, we give you advice. If you know it's good for you, you'll come and ask us for advice so you can safeguard yourself on the Day of Judgment. Because Sahha an Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? Reported in the Sahihain, right? That on the Day of Judgment, the feet of the Imam will be rooted and will not move until he discharges and answers in detail about the tafasil, the details of every single individual of his ra'iyah, of the people for whom he's responsible. So no person of sense who understands something from the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam wants to rush to positions of wilaya, amma, right? And well-established position with regard to wilaya in our deen is, right? Ala kullukum ra'in wa kullukum mas'ulun an ra'iyati. Indeed, each one of you is a shepherd, and each one of you will be asked with regard to those for which he's responsible, right? الرجل راع وهو مسؤول عن أهل بيته, right? The imam is a shepherd, and he will be asked with regard to the individuals of his family, right? But the imam is ra'in, and he will be asked with regard to all of the people under him. This applies to the Khalifa, to the Salatin that he appoints, and the times after the Khilafah. It applies to people, whatever their names are, king, president, what have you. So no one rushes to that. Okay? All right. So that was the political situation. But simultaneously, Baghdad was one of the centers of ilm, right? Of fiqh. Also the centers of kalam, speculative theology. Speculative theology is related to, but not the same as, ilm iman and aqidah. It's related to, but not the same. Okay? Among the ulama of the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, kalam in this time and in the time before was a bad word. This is clear. Right? Every single one of the A'imma al-Arba'ah has athar attributed to them, blaming fi them al-kalam. Every single one of them. Because what they meant by kalam is the intellectual trend, which had started really over the last 100 years, really over the last 75, intensified over the last 50 years before Imam Ahmad was born, by which people were using the logical mechanisms and devices of the Greco-Roman, the Aristotelian and Platonic tradition, right? In order to debate the tafasil, the detailed points of Iman, Allah Azza wa Jal, and His Asma and Sifat, the nature of Nabuwah, the nature of Taqleef, and the like. And the position of the Imma, like the position of the fiqh, like the position of all the Imma of the Ahl Sunnah Jama'ah, was that the position of the Sahaba and the Tabi'een and the Atba'u Tabi'een, which is with regard to the nusus of the Quran and the Sunnah, having to deal with these things, murruha kama ja'at. Pass them on as you found them. And when people come to you and say, what do you say about the relationship between the sifat of Allah Azza wa Jal? Shall we talk about the essence of Allah and the relationship between His attributes and His essence? Their position was the position of their teachers, the tabi'u tabi'een, and their teachers, the tabi'een, and the teachers, their teachers, the salaf, them all of the sahaba, their position was al-i'rad, that you turn away from this. That asking the question and engaging in using logical mechanisms in order to debate these things is bid'ah in and of itself. Right? Again, this is not a position that has to do with the issues we have discussing amongst ourselves, among the group that calls itself Salafiyya and what have you. This is something known in the intellectual tradition, right? There's not an imam amongst the four who doesn't have statements with regard to the blameworthy nature of kalam. Okay? Now, the position of the Imam of Ahl Sunnah Jama'ah in the main came to be afterwards that, yes, it's permissible to use logical tools in order to defend the aqidah of the Ahl Sunnah Jama'ah from people who attack it using the tools, as long as one is careful how one does it, right? But at this time, that is not the position of the Imma of the Ahl Sunnah Jama'ah. When a student of theirs wants to study kalam, get out of my study circle. Oh, you sit in kalam circles? And he said, oh, I'm studying kalam because I want to fight against the Qadiriyah or the Mu'tazila. Give up kalam and you can come back to my study circle. Right? This is not a position of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal alone. It's attributed by Imam Shafi'i. His statements with regard to participating in kalam are intense. It's a position attributed to Imam Malik. Intense. It's a position attributed to Imam Abu Hanifa, although he was involved early in his career in studying kalam circles, and he debated by ways of maintaining the position of the Ahl Sunnah Jama'ah some of the kalamists of his time. right? But it was a position of his as well. Okay, and well, there are nuqul attributed to him. Okay? So that was the intellectual position. You had numerous people. You had muhaddithun, people who were concerned with transmitting the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. And what did they do? They sat in majalis and they participated in sama', right? They participated in hearing from and conveying to people who had come in order to hear what the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam had said, right? And what did they do, right? They went and they traveled to the amsar, traveled to the civilizational locuses, the cities which were the basis of the ummah, that is, to Mecca, Medina, Basra, Kufa, Damascus, Fustat, later to become Qahira, Cairo, Baghdad, Marw, Herat. These major cities, there were areas where one went, and one went there because the nature of ulama is, just like the nature of all intellectual classes, is that they tend to convene in cities, right? Around the elite. Not because they're serving them, but because the nature of intellectual activity among human beings is that it tends to need financial support and it needs communication of the type that's associated with cities. Right? Okay? Then you had people of fiqh. And what did they do? They participated in naql, transmitting the opinions of the people of their region, in the Hijaz, the fuqaha of their region, in Al-Iraq, Kufa and Basra, the fuqaha of their region, in Egypt and Ifriqiya, Al-Maghrib, the people of their region and people of other regions, and munadhara, mujadala, right? Participating in educational debate in order to clarify the strengths of their positions in their schools. Okay? Then a third group you had, intellectual group that you had, is you had the kalamists. Okay? Mutakallimun. And what did they do? We just alluded to it, right? They engaged in discussing issues related to Iman, Allah Azza wa Jal, Nubuwwah, right? Al-Akhirah, using the tools of logic of the time. That is the Aristotelian tools that are part of the intellectual tradition of Aristotle, right? All right? And of the Neoplatonic, sometimes some of the Neoplatonic tools as well. Okay? But particularly Aristotelian tools, maybe Neoplatonic positions, okay? That's three. A fourth intellectual group, who are they? You had the Ahlul Zuhd, right? The Zuhad, plural of Zahid. What does Zahid mean? Zahid is the ism al-fa'il, is the active participle from Zahada yazhadu, Zuhadan. What does Zahada mean? It means to deem something else to be in low regard, a low esteem. So a Zahid is a Zahid fi dunya. He's someone who looks at the dunya, and his position, psycho-spiritually, is that he holds the dunya to be not very much compared to Allah Azza wa Jal wa ma inda, and what is with Allah. So we translate it as asceticism, an ascetic, right? Someone who takes very little from the dunya and who's concerned with his time and his energy with the akhirah. Okay? And this was the position of the ulama generally, but there were people who would be the progenitors of what came to be known as tasawwuf, but which tended to be called zuhd, riyada, and other names, but also tasawwuf existed by the same time in Baghdad in particular, right? These are people like Imam al-Junayd, right? Imam al-Mahasibi, and what have you, right? Okay? And all of these groups had some interplay between them, right? Meaning that it was also in the case that a person had some achievement in one, but not in the other, or he achievement in several of them, okay? So this is the position into which Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal was born, right? His father passed away. His mother gave birth to him in Baghdad. He was raised in Baghdad. All right? When he was young, as early as 16 years old, he attended the study circle of Al-Qadi Abu Yusuf, one of the two primary companions of Imam Abu Hanifa. But he soon left that. Why? In order to begin the process of hearing hadith, right? Because hearing hadith is something that muhaddithun like to do early and young. Why? Because when a hadith scholar hears something young, at a young age, and then Allah gives him life to live to an old age, then he's called, in the technical language of the muhaddithun, mu'ammar, someone given a long life, right? And which means that he can link people together. And if he appears on a transmission chain, an isnad, sanad, then that sanad is going to be shorter than other people. Imagine, for example, a person lives in a time, for example, the time of Imam Abu Hanifa, when there are maybe typically 6 people between one and between the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? 6 people who, on average, each person on a transmission chain, on so-and-so, on so-and-so, akhbarani or haddathani, I heard from so-and-so and so-and-so. Each person in general heard at 30 years old from someone who's 50 years old, right? Say, on average, okay? If there are 2 people on that chain where someone heard when he was 15 and then transmitted the same hadith when he's 90, that can shorten the chain from 6 people to 3 people. And as you know, when it comes to the muhaddithun, what they call alu al-hadith, alu al-isnad, meaning having a high isnad, meaning having a smaller number of people of isnad, is one of their objectives. Sheikh Hamza mentioned this, I think, during his talk, right? He said that Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, among his fada'il, is that he is the imam, meaning the direct imam, of most of the ashab al-sunan. Most of the authors of the Kutub al-Sitta, of the 6 best known books of hadith of the Ahl Sunnah Jama'ah, are direct students of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. It's true for Imam al-Bukhari, true for Imam Muslim, via Imam al-Bukhari. It's true for Imam Abu Dawood, who's one of his ashab, right? Okay? And it's true directly or through one indirection, right, to almost each of the remaining al-Baqiyah, okay, the remaining members, okay? But as he mentioned, very few of them reported from Imam, when it comes to Imam Bukhari and Muslim, reported from Imam Ahmad because they found shorter chains, right? They found shorter chains. And we'll get back to that later, inshallah ta'ala, okay? So he started traveling, right? And he began to do this when he was approximately 16 years old in the year 186, right? When he's 16 years old. He performed 5 hajjs in his lifetime. Because what the muhaddithun typically used to do is they used to try to bring together the ibadah of hajj and the rihla of traveling in order to hear hadith, right? So he performed hajj 5 times. 3 of those times, rajilan, walking. Yeah. It's real. Walking, not only from Baghdad, but in some cases where he may have been at the time when he set out, right? So if he was in Yemen, Baghdad, Yemen, then from Yemen to them, right? Right? If he was in Khurasan, as he was, Hajj, right? And then twice of those times, riding. He says in the well-known hadith, he says once he lost the path, because there were demarcated signposts, provided paths. This is for people who are going on Hajj. And he just started going around saying, Dalluni, Dalluni ala tariq. People tell me how I can get back to the path, right? Because he didn't ask people because he was mutawakkil ala Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? He used to rely upon Allah Azza wa Jal, and as many of the imma of Zuhud of his time used to do, he used to detest asking people, to the point that, as we'll see at the end of his life, he took to not taking food and drink from his sons and his near relatives. Why? Because he didn't like that towards the end of his life, after he had become very famous, the Khalifa of the time started to provide them with a stipend because they were extremely poor themselves. So he said, don't do it. And his son said, Taha, we're going to obey you. His sons Abdullah and his son Salih and his Qaraba. But then things got intense with them when they would go days without eating, right? So then their sons, his grandsons, would say, Abu, can we just take something and just divide things among them? And they would say yes. Imam Ahmad found this out, and he wouldn't take food prepared from his sons. This is extreme zuhud, abstemiousness, because of his concern that every single luqma, every single morsel of food, every single drink of water that came to him only come from permissible mal. Not halal and haram in the very ethno-legalistic sense that we think of it, but meaning that its source was halal. If it comes from the Khalifa, he says, I don't know what that means, because where does the Khalifa get his wealth from? He snatches money from this person, he tortures and humiliates this person, he goes to war against or does musadara. That's a vicious auditing where you take political enemies and you take all of their wealth and strip them down and leave them destitute from this person. So I'm not going to eat from anything that comes with it, right? He would eat from the money that was a result of the kira, isti'jar, the leasing of some of his property that he had, and then the lessees would pay him a pittance, a small amount every single month, and that he'd have, if it was enough, in order to make some bread or make some sawaiq. Sawaiq, you know what sawaiq is? Sawaiq is granola, right? It's wheat mixed with, I think, what the South Asian brothers would call ghee, purified butter, right? And water mixed and then dried like our granola, so it can be used as zad, right? As a food that you take when you travel, because then it can be hard, and when you stop, you add it to water, and then you can eat it. And that's what he used to eat. Radiallahu ta'ala anhum. May Allah reward him. And he didn't used to take gifts from the khulafa. Why? Because he knew that the reason the khulafa wanted to give him gifts is because they wanted to borrow from his fame and from his position. Because the people used to love him, hubban jamman. As is the case with all of the ulama, right? Al-amilun, and particularly a'immat sunnah. The people used to love them. Okay? People used to love them. So he traveled on various trips, and he went and he visited the various lands of Islam. Right? He went to Yemen, and he heard from all of his shuyukh, primarily and famously from Abdul-Basser, Sahib al-Musannaf, right? The author of the well-known Musannaf of Abdul-Basser in Sana'a, right? He heard, of course, from the ulama of Baghdad. He went to Mar, Cairo, throughout Iraq, parts of the Maghrib, Hijaz, Jazeera, Damascus. And he sat and he would hear from people. And as he heard from people, his shah would increase and precede him. Meaning that when he came into a given town, the senior shuyukh who were much older than him, who had the shortest asanid, would know Ahmad ibn Hanbal is coming. This is in time when you had people who were walking computers. You say something in front of them one time, they repeat it to you verbatim, as Sheikh Muqbil mentioned, right? Imam Malik, okay? In this time, he stood out. He was a polymath. He was a savant. Some of the A'imma speculate that he had memorized anywhere between 100,000 at the low end, and some say perhaps 300,000, and some, although this is a minority, but say 1 million ahadith. What does that mean, 1 million ahadith? It means their asanid, every single person on their transmission chain, and the matan, and the actual text of the hadith, if you include all the transmissional variants, right? And since he was hafiz, since he was imam al-sunnah, right, It means not only each one of them, but the state, death date, birth date, and the jahr and ta'adil, meaning the ranking, the evaluation on the rankings of the ulama of hadith as to each one of these people. Right? So we're talking about a savant, right? Among savants, because there were other people like this, right? Imam Malik, Yahya bin Ma'in, Ali al-Madini, right? Sufyan al-Thawri, Sufyan bin Uyayna. There are many people like this. But he was known amongst them for this. So they would dress and they would come out, and people would come out and say, okay, we're going to, and they would sit in marathon sessions. They'd say, these are what I have from the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is what I have from the hadith of Abu Bakr, from the akhbar of Abu Bakr. This is what I have from the akhbar of Umar ibn Khattab, al-Faruq. This is what I have from the akhbar of Uthman ibn Affan, Dhun Nurayn. This is what I have from the akhbar of Ali ibn Abi Talib, Qarram Allahu wajha. This is what I have from the akhbar of al-Ashrat al-Mubasharat al-Jannah, the 10 of the Sahaba, although they are more well known as being given glad tidings from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam of Jannah during their lifetimes, right? This is what I have from all of the Muhajirin. This is what I have from all of the Ansar. This is what I have of all the people of this tribe, right? And he would collect them. And he had a treasure trove. And he put together a collection which was an emendation of those ahadith of 30,000 ahadith in a work which is called a musnad. Now, a musnad is a technical term, it's mustalah in ilm al-hadith. What's a musnad? A musnad is a work put together, ordered, not by topic, right, but by the reporter, right? So, for example, if you open the musnad of Ahmad ibn Hanbal, and maybe another time, inshallah, we'll come together and I'll read some portions of the musnad on you. Alhamdulillah, I'm blessed to be able to report it from multiple shuyukh, mashallah ta'ala. It begins, this is what I have from the hadith of Al-Khulafa al-Rashidun, Abu Bakr ibn Siddiq. And then he'll mention all of the hadith that he has from him. Then Umar, then Uthman bin Affan, then Ali, then the rest of the Ashara al-Mubasharat al-Jannah. Then from the Ummahat al-Mu'mineen, and so on and so forth. Al-Muqthirin, meaning the Sahaba who reported another hadith, meaning including Ummuna Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha wa radaha, okay? And he would mention that, okay? So he is Imam Sunnah, meaning that the ulama of his time, the muhaddithun of his time, the huffaz of his time, i'tarafu, confessed that he was the Imam of a hadith. He is arguably, and I say this not lightly, because when you're talking about people like Imam Shafi'i, Imam Abu Hanifa, and Imam Malik, you have to be careful. But he's arguably the strongest of the four Imams with regard to knowledge of nuqul, knowledge of transmitted opinions. And I said transmitted opinions, not hadith, because I mean a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But as we'll see when it comes to his fiqh, I mean also the akhbar and fatawa of the Khulafa al-Rashidun and the Sahaba, right? And the tabi'een, atba'u tabi'een. He collected their opinions as transmitted opinions. So when it came to fiqh, he was an imam in fiqh, right? And this is one of the things that was confusing, because even one of the major ulama of his time, he said, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, he was a great imam in hadith, but he wasn't an imam in fiqh, right? And some of his followers became a little incensed by that, and they boycotted, and they surrounded his house and treated him in a way they shouldn't have treated him, right? Because he's a great imam himself. But people can go too far in their love for some of the awliya and a'imma, all right? But that's not sound. That's not sound. How do we know he's the imam of fiqh? One, as you just heard from Sheikh Tariq, Imam Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i subhanAllah, it's not enough for him, right, to have one madhab. He had how many madhabs? 2 madhabs. Al-Qadim wal-Jadid. He had the old madhab, which is an entire madhab with its usul and qawa'id and masail al-furuq, which he established in Baghdad. And then when Imam Shafi'i got up and he said, I'm going to Misr, I'm going to Egypt, and anyone who wants to come, they'll see what I do when I get there. Create a new madhab, right? Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal is one of the 4 primary reporters and conveyors of Imam Shafi'i's old madhab. Okay. 2, when Imam Shafi'i left Baghdad, he said, in a well-known hadith, he said, right, ما تركت فيها, I have not left in it, Baghdad, anyone afqah, having more fiqh, awra, having more piety, wa afdal, wa ahfadh, and better and more retentive of the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam than Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, right? So the Imam Mujtahid testified to his imamah, and he was still young at that time, fairly young, as ilm goes, right? 3rd, his ashab recorded hundreds, thousands of aqwal, masail, detailed positions on masail from him, right? People used to come, because he was famous during his lifetime, from around the world, or send letters from around the world asking about this detailed situation, that detailed situation, and he would answer. And how would he answer? He would answer, and this goes to the usul of his madhab, from the Quran, from the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Imam Sunnah, right? Then, if he didn't find something explicit in there, then he would go to the aqwal of the Sahaba. In the madhab of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, qawl al-sahabi is an independent source, meaning like Quran, Sunnah, Qiyas. He said that although he knows Qiyas, we know Qiyas, he said, I'm ashamed, right, in front of Allah, when there's an issue that I don't find an explicit text on in the Quran and Sunnah, to go to analogical reasoning, Qiyas, when there's a stated opinion that I know from one of the Sahaba, right? And not only do you know whether or not there's opinion from the Sahaba, he would know whether or not the opinion is from most of the Sahaba, or whereas from the Khulafa al-Rashidun as opposed to the other Sahaba, or whereas from the Sahaba who are well known for fiqh as opposed to those who weren't, and so on and so forth. In what setting, what was the asbab in which it was given? Was a matter of public policy, for example, that one of the Khulafa al-Rashidun gave. Okay? Then Qiyas, right? Okay? Qiyas. He was not a denier of Qiyas, right? Dawood al-Zahiri as a different madhab. The Zahiri madhab, he was not a denier of Qiyas. Okay? All right? He lived, settled in Baghdad, and then he was exposed to the mihna. And we'll end this and elaborate on the question and answer period. The reason why he is arguably the individual after the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and some of the Sahaba who is most singled out, arguably, for monographs, meaning single person treatises with regard to his seerah from all of the ulama, is because his position with regard to al-mihna, the inquisition that took place under 2.5, 3 of the khulafa of the Abbasiyun, right, is something that is remembered and lauded by ulama across madhahib from his time to our time. And that is, in brief, that during the time of Ma'amun, and then intensively by Mu'tasim, right? And then to a lesser extent, Wathiq, and then he got relief by Al-Mutawakkil. These are names of the Khulafa al-Rashidun. They used to name themselves. They would have a Khalifal name in addition to their own name, right? For example, Khalifa al-Wathiq, he was Muhammad, but his Khalifal name was al-wathiq billah, meaning that the one holding firm by Allah, right? And then after was the mutawakkal ala Allah, or you call it mutawakkal, meaning the one who relied upon Allah, right? And al-ma'mun, the one kept safe, billah, right? And then after al-mu'tasim, the one who's protected from error by Allah, al-mu'tasim billah, right? What happened is that the preeminent Kalamist group of the time, the Mu'tazila, from al-i'tizal, right, meaning the withdrawers, right? People who are intellectual descendants of a person, according to their best known ideology, who was part of the study circle of Imam Hassan al-Basri, right? But who was kicked out of the study circle of Imam Hassan al-Basri because he started engaging in speculative theology, asking detailed questions about matters and using logical, argumentative approaches to matters that the early Muslims didn't do. Developed a school which was most advanced when it came to kalam, and which took positions on issues which ran counter to the opinion of the ulama, the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, i.e. the community of the Sahaba and the people who learned from them, and the people who learned from them, and people who learned from them to the time of Imam Ahmad. What type of positions? One, some of them held, well, most of them held, that Allah Azza wa Jal is not seen on the Day of Judgment, right? Whereas it's mutawatir, mass transmitted, that the mu'minun will see Allah Azza wa Jal in the akhirah, right? This is mass transmitted, not rigorously authenticated, sahih, mass transmitted. Right? You guys know tawatir, you know there are levels of transmission. Tawatir are those transmissions that are transmitted by large groups of people to large groups of people in such a way such that the possibility of collusion over lying is impossible, right? The Quran is mutawatir, right? Because it's not transmitted by solitary trains. It's transmitted from large group of people to large group of people, right? A small group of ahadith relative to the large group are mutawatir. This is one of them. Okay, this is one of them, okay? We're going to close now because I know that, subhanAllah, we need to pray. If there's a question and answer session afterwards, the organizers know best, inshallah ta'ala, then we can answer questions with regard to the mihna, the Inquisition, its nature, how did Imam Ahmad respond to it, why was his response praiseworthy, why is it that the ulama praised him in the way they praised him, how did the imama in Quran, Sunnah, Zuhud, abstemiousness, what have you, come together in his madhab, and what are some of the khasa'is, some of the specialized characteristics of his madhab that are useful for us today. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين جزاهم الله خيرا أحسن الجزاء. Yes, just, I don't know, whatever. Inshallah. If it's too late for people, they need to go home, that's fine.
So inshallah, we'll have Isha prayer right now, and after Isha, inshallah, we'll have the question and answer session. Jazakallah.
Do you need to move this?
Yeah.
Sure? No, it's fine.